is there any, in our sort of efforts to get permaculture further out into the mainstream, is there any real kind of danger of kind of overdoing it? You know, are we in any potential danger of becoming mainstream? Well, I decided to kind of explore this idea a little bit. So I actually sent this to Newt. Newt was here earlier. Oh, there's Newt. Newt over there. So is this any kind of a possibility? Well, we'll find out. This was fun to do. I mean, it's really simple, you know. I can explain how to do this, so, you know, if you wanted to kind of doctor some of your own photos, you could do the same. Some of our sponsors, actually. You can see over here some of our sponsors. Maybe that's about all I have. Oh, okay. So yeah, there are a couple of words I like to use, allies and assets, and I've seen them used a number of times. They're certainly other people's favorite words too, but I think that it's certainly worthwhile to kind of emphasize. But first I'd like to just kind of share a little bit of some of my own experience with Suburbia. I lived the first 6 years of my life in a suburban neighborhood in upstate New York, and it was an awesome place for kids. We had a swamp, we had a place to go fishing, lots of other baby boom kids. I think my dad probably did about a 25-mile round trip working for Texaco at the time. We moved to Dallas, Texas, where we lived in suburban North Dallas. There were a lot of 4-bedroom brick houses that just kind of went for miles. We had an air-conditioned doghouse in Dallas. I was quite shocked moving to Dallas from New York. And I've also traveled a good deal too, out of the country. And maybe about 5 years out of the country, all very low budget kind of travel. And interestingly, about the only countries I've seen that have any significant amount of American-style suburbia, they all speak English. There's England. I spent a little time in England. I spent a good deal of time in New Zealand. I spent a good deal of time in South Africa, and there's plenty of suburbia in those English-speaking countries. I haven't been to Australia, but I've seen pictures. It's very much that way too. So I lived in a neighborhood in Houston, and just by good luck, one of my housemates was into permaculture, and her name was Jack, and she had a couple radio programs on local KPFT Pacifica radio before it kind of got corporatized. And Jack was into permaculture, and she did a really nice little bit in the front yard. I was pretty impressed with that. So by and by, I took a permaculture course in Austin. I went to Austin. Patricia Dubois, I think she's changed her last name. Anybody know permaculture in Austin? But she's still there. She's still there teaching permaculture in Austin. And I was living in Houston, and actually there was a permaculture group in Houston maybe about 1990, 1991, and there was a fellow there named Bob Randall, and he's a little bit older, but he was transforming his suburban property in the late 1990s, or the late 1980s actually. It was the late 1980s. And he lived in a whole other part of town from where I lived, but he was doing permaculture redesign on his probably half-acre, half-acre property on a corner in southwest Houston. So it was time to leave Houston. I left Houston, and that was a good experience to leave Texas. Anybody? I know some people spent some time in Texas, and of course you're not there anymore. So I moved up to Eugene, and early on, when I was in Eugene, I became involved with a group here in town that had a unintended, but it turned out a fairly significant kind of a consequence on my life. There was one day in the news, and Alan will remember this, I'm not sure if Mark was here at that time, but the newspaper had a headline, "Welcome Hyundai to Eugene," the multinational Hyundai, and most of us were going like, how did that happen? And the whole original plan was that this could have been a factory that would have employed 3,000 people, and also it was intended to be built out in the wetland. Well, it's not the most happy story because they did build the first part of the factory, and we were kind of warning about dealing with large multinational corporations, and our concern was that with all this giveaways, trying to attract more jobs, this was going to overload public infrastructure, require new streets, crowd schools, perhaps even end up accelerating the time we have to build new infrastructure for water, for electricity, and the way that this whole happened anyway was it was a backroom thing, and it was just like somebody got together and decided they were going to try to have Hyundai move into Eugene. So they were here for about 10 years, and they left after about 10 years. The tax breaks ran out, and to be fair, the global chip market probably changed. It's a changeable market. So there's this huge factory out in West Eugene in the wetlands that every now and then there's a sort of excitement, oh, we're going to use it to build solar panels, or maybe a giant roller rink, or something, but it still languishes out there. But that involvement called my attention to urban land use. And I don't have any training in that. I have a degree in geography, so I'm kind of interested in landscape and physical geography, cultural geography. But that kind of grabbed my attention, the whole idea of suburbia, even though I lived in suburbia a good deal of my life. I kind of tuned into that. And some time later, after Hyundai and a trip to Italy, as a matter of fact, didn't see too much suburbia there, I came back, and it was becoming time to buy my own house, to have my own house. And a friend of mine's wife owned a house out in River Road in the neighborhood where I live now, and I bought that house. I never borrowed money before, but my intention from the beginning was to turn that house make some major changes to that house. So what you see here is what my backyard used to look like. This place was an asset in the rough. It was the house was not a challenge place. It's a pretty solid house from the mid-50s. But from the get-go, my intention was that I was going to take care of more of my needs closer to where I live. So this is the backyard, and you can see something of a progression from the way it looked at the start, and then immediately underneath that, that's what it looks like more now. A lot more biodiversity, and a lot more pleasant aesthetically to look at too. So another look is the front yard, actually the driveway. And I took out the driveway. There's a lot of pavement, there's an awful lot of pavement. So this is just some examples, and I'll show a couple more, of developing more of a term I like to use is home economics, where you're taking care of more needs closer to home. And of course that can be water, it can be energy, and of course it's also your social needs as well, just as important. So, so then I had a patio, a south-facing patio, and it had actually been closed in before I bought the house. But after a few years, it was necessary to rebuild that patio and that sunroom because it wasn't built very well in the first place. There's wonderful things you can do on site with your property, a lot of edible landscaping in the place. I wasn't really thinking about it quite so much at the outset, but it became an important place regionally in Eugene for outreach. Had a lot of people visit my place, and over the years I think there's probably been over 1,000 people visit my place, and we had a great tour yesterday. Wow. All over Eugene, and might have set a new record for number of people in my backyard. It was 60 or 70 people in the backyard, and we had a really nice little visit there today too. So a house is just an enormous asset to work with. Almost any house. I know that probably a lot of people here have done some major work on their house. Just kind of curious, it's just a little poll. If you have done some major retrofits on your house, I mean like rainwater, passive solar, maybe taking out a driveway, and you may have done some really great stuff that I haven't done, I would just like to put your hand up if you really consider that you. I wish this was the normal population right here. Yeah. And then it even needs to be way more than that too, because we want to create models and examples of what can be done with a, safe to say, substantially flawed kind of culture and economic system. But that's awesome, you know, and you probably shared with other people have come over to your place, and you've had site tours, and people are curious too. Like Sarah Bill was saying, you know, like people are out there munching their raspberries, and you kind of welcome that because it's a great way to kind of connect. I've got my own counterpart to that. So a suburban property, or any kind of a property, this is just where I happen to live, but even more urban types of places, you know, you can apply these same ideals to, and as Abel was talking about, permaculture has application in the rural area as well, lots of different ways. Well, I'm really lucky that I have friends in the neighborhood who are into this as well. And these rectangles, these aren't all properties that have done as much as like Robbie or myself. Some of them have a lot of transformation on them. And we saw some of these places, we visited some of these places yesterday. And but this is kind of in the early going. I don't think anybody here would say that this is really what permaculture and a suburban landscape, this is what the goal is. We're early on in this adventure. But it's an awesome adventure because the whole neighborhood is an asset. The whole neighborhood is an opportunity to transform, and that's what we're interested in doing. But one of the most important ingredients for transforming is, of course, permaculture is a great tool for transforming. But I think even maybe a tool that is even before permaculture is, how do we value our own selves? How do we value our friends, our neighbors, our families? And what do we do about that? What do we do with our own time? Making the time to do this is really important. Everybody has different situation about what they have to do. Families take a lot of time, but those kinds of choices, what do we do with our time and what do we do with our money? So let's just take a quick look at some of my neighbors. Here's Darmalaya. A lot of people, how many people went on that tour and saw Darmalaya? Gosh, not really, just a few, yeah. It's a very important place in our neighborhood. We've had events there over the years of all kinds of events. We've had our own sort of small permaculture convergences, and there have been weddings there, there's been funerals there, there's been seasonal celebrations. This is a wonderful joy to have this place in our neighborhood. And then there's another location down the street that actually some of you maybe sleeping, the Safari Village. We kind of have a little suburban Safari Village down there, which looks kind of cool. And so that place didn't look like that when Al first bought that property. That took a lot of time and effort, but it was identified as an asset. It was bought not to leave it the way it was, but it was bought to turn into something that was really powerful. And fortunately, Al has made the backyard accessible to Ravi. So Ravi's got a roaring garden, and there's pizza oven back there, kind of a little small eco-village. And so this has become a favorite place in our neighborhood for having celebrations. So that's another big ally, another big asset. And of course, we're having this event here in the River Road Park District Recreation Center. I've spent a fair amount of time, like I mentioned a couple nights ago, I did those paintings back up there against the wall there. Somebody else did this here. But to have an asset like this in your neighborhood that's very friendly, I don't know. I heard that Dale and Sandy were by, or Dale and Kathy were by earlier in the day, and they were probably relieved to see the place was still here and things still functioning. And I was told that they were happy with the way this looked. But they are an asset as well, and this place is an asset. You know, think about, do you have some kind of a facility like this where you live? Maybe think about doing some kind of a scale that you can manage of some kind of an expo like what we had here with your local people. So the community center is another huge ally, and another asset, another ally that we have that we've actually spent a fair amount of time talking about and made reference to multiple times, multiple speakers, and it's actually a theme of the Convergence, is neighborhoods, greening our neighborhoods with permaculture. And we had a session earlier in the day with people from a lot of different places in the Northwest. I may not be accurate, but I think it was probably one of the most interesting round circle conversations of people who are kind of neighborhood wonks, you know, people who talk a little bit of the city jargon, you know, and they're acquainted with how cities work and what the opportunities are, because most of the stories, like Jackie was talking about Beacon Food Forest, and Matt, you know, the things that they're doing in Portland. A lot of this is actually working with city structures. So in a sense, city structures can be a huge ally themselves. So a lot of the information that went out about this Convergence went out in email and with snail mail, both, through our neighborhood association, because our neighborhood association actually endorsed this the Convergence, and a number of people in our neighborhood association have played an important part. You've seen Steve. Well, maybe you haven't seen Steve. Steve's kind of a shy sort of a guy, but he was the indoor site coordinator and kind of looked after all of this. And John, important, Claire, very crucial, critical participants in making this I think, a successful event. So they are allies and assets by way of the neighborhood association, and of course their own interests are in this realm as well. So this is actually right here is the message that went out to 6,000 addresses by snail mail. Here in River Road, only in River Road, because the neighborhood association has a little bit of a budget for sending out mail, and because the neighborhood association is favorable towards this. This really helped out a lot, with our publicity. I'm hoping that a good number of people from the neighborhood ended up coming to the expo. And I know a few people did who actually, registered and came inside and participated in the Convergence here too. So I was on the board of my neighborhood association for about 10 years, and that's kind of how I'm a little bit tuned in to, Krista was at the same time too. Krista's right here. So, and that was just a great experience about civics, building civic culture. It's great, we can kind of do some cool things on our own properties, but I think we realize it needs to go way beyond that. During that time I was on my board, I had a really, I thought, a good idea that did become a reality. It didn't last forever, but for about 5 or 6 years, we had a subcommittee, we called it Committee on Sustainability. And what that was, it was through our neighborhood programs, because Eugene has about 22 different neighborhood associations. And for about 11 or 12 at our heyday, we'd have meetings and there'd be representatives from 10, 11, 12 of the different neighborhood associations, and we're coordinating some of our activities, and we also have access to the communication networks from each of our neighborhood associations. And because we had no legal status, we were just kind of an ad hoc group, but another neighborhood group, which was also unofficial, kind of said, this is a subcommittee of the Neighborhood Leaders Council. So we kind of gained a little bit of a platform by way of our involvement with our neighborhood program and with these neighborhood associations. So we could get some, we didn't get any money from the city, but we could borrow gear. We got a lot of good publicity by way of neighborhood channels. So this was just a huge asset that was just sitting there, with nobody really making very much use of it for years. And this small group that we had, we did education, had programs at the Green Home Show, and we kind of opened up the bike tours. A few years, we'd have 10 or 12 bike tours, in the summer. Every weekend there was a bike tour in some neighborhood, to see all those great permaculture, green kinds of places where people lived. So there was this entity, the neighborhood program, the neighborhood associations, that were just kind of there, and we finally identified this is a real asset. We can do something with this, and we did. And there wasn't enough ongoing energy to keep this going, to keep the Committee on Sustainability going, but it's a good model because any city with a neighborhood program could do this kind of thing too, and maybe it would last longer. So just sort of a thought there that others might want to make the time to do that. So this is actually some pictures of some of our Committee on Sustainability. You might even recognize a couple people there, but just an asset that we made good use of. Through my involvement with my neighborhood association, I kind of knew a little bit more about what sort of city programs there are. And what this picture here was during a filbert grove on public property. We actually visited that filbert grove today. And it's a story similar to a number of others that we had in the neighborhood track. But it is making use of a city program that wasn't intended, to help support neighborhood food security. It's just that there's a city program called Park Stewards that helps empower, actually, citizens in their neighborhoods for taking initiative. When we have work parties at the Filbert Grove, the city provides tools, even Paul Newman lemonade, all kinds of, it's nice little knee pads because you're on your knees a lot for working on these filbert trees. But again, here is a program that's just there. It wasn't really intended to assist neighborhood food security, but there it is. It can be used that way. Another program that almost every town has, a lot of towns have, of course, is Neighborhood Watch. And if you can imagine the idea of front yard gardens, what could be better for Neighborhood Watch than having front yard gardens? If anybody just makes the time, maybe think about going downtown and making an appointment with whoever in your city administers Neighborhood Watch. Could be the police department. The police department administers that program here in Eugene. There's no difficulty in sort of understanding that, in a sense, the police department ought to be promoting permaculture, because if we're going to be wanting to have eyes on the neighborhood and on the street, what better way to do it than having a front yard garden? So this is just another example of what's the opportunities that are there, and lots of cities have all kinds of opportunities. I've also really gained a great interest in neighborhoods too, just as a sort of a social, political form. What a cool scene that is. People have been doing neighborhood stuff for thousands of years, even before this. What is it? First kind of human settlement goes back 8,000 or 9,000 years, something like that. Here's one of my favorite places. I spent a little time here, Isola del Giglio in Italy. You might recognize that name because that's where the passenger ship kind of got a little too close to the shoreline. Beautiful. You can see the vernacular design of narrow little places. You're certainly not going to have a garage in this place. And you kind of probably know your neighbors too. Not to over-romanticize, I mean, this is medieval. This is kind of a medieval, and I'm sure the places have been remodeled so that they're comfortable, but this probably really wasn't all that kind of a comfortable place to live back when it was first built. And of course it has a wall around it because there were unfriendly people out and about. And this is one, the Tulou in China. I know people who have been to see these, but this is a whole other kind of a neighborhood, because neighborhoods have a function. There's a reason why people live in neighborhoods. There's safety, there's economic reasons, there's social reasons. People have been living in neighborhoods for a long time. This is a real interesting one. I think it was back in the years of maybe Richard Nixon, when satellite photography wasn't really quite so good. You can imagine what I'm going to say. The satellites look down and see all these kind of circles down there in China. Of course, this is communist China, and they're thinking, God, those are really big missile silos. Kind of got the Pentagon scared a little bit. So I want to touch a little bit on a few other programs that in other towns where people were making good use of neighborhoods. I'm really pretty fascinated with neighborhoods. Maybe this has been touched on a little bit. Local 2020 in Port Townsend. And some people in Port Townsend were concerned about tsunamis. Some of them had been to New Orleans and helped clean up with Hurricane Katrina. So there was a real interest in emergency disaster preparedness. They went to the city, the county, actually Jefferson County is what it is, their emergency preparedness, and made common cause with the emergency preparedness. And the emergency preparedness people knew these were people who maybe, in addition to concern about maybe tsunami because Port Townsend's right there at sea level, they knew that these are people who don't think the economic system is built to last. But there was definitely an understanding and a collaboration because preparing for one is similar to preparing for the other. So in Port Townsend, the locals said there's no neighborhood program in Port Townsend, but they kind of created some of their own neighborhood cohesion through a program that the city has called Mapping Your Neighborhood. Anybody do any mapping your neighborhood? Yeah, a few people. Several people. Wouldn't you say that once you kind of meet your neighbors and you get this kind of nice information that kind of gives you a legitimization, a platform, you just get this DVD and some nice glossy stuff and you go knock on your neighbor's door. You meet your neighbor and the sort of overt reason is that you're concerned what happens if there's a flood or what happens if there's an earthquake, and of course those are real possibilities. But once people meet, they can do anything. This totally mainstream program can be turned into a really radical way of organizing your neighborhood. It's up to people who participate to do whatever they want. So there in Port Townsend, they've done a little bit of that. That's to be celebrated. You can do a search on Local 2020 on your computer and you can find out more. It's pretty impressive. We heard a little bit about this today, about alley assets in Portland. Anybody know about alley assets in Portland? Yeah. And actually, Jonathan, I just must have sat down and we didn't see him. But yeah, Jonathan was talking about. So this is a whole other way to kind of get to know your neighbors. A lot of alleys sort of fall into disrepair, and what do? You take a blackberry choked alley and you meet your neighbors, you make a plan. There's a little bit of a toolkit for doing this. So there's help, in doing this. Maybe you don't get too much money from the city, but you can meet your neighbors and turn your alley into an attractive place that brings people together. This picture here, this is actually an alley. Okay. This is in the future. Yeah, this is a vision. This is a doctored photo. This is kind of like those ones I showed earlier. But I saw some pictures that looked almost as good as that. So this is just another opportunity for building community in our neighborhoods. It's a huge asset that is just there for people to make use of. And this, of course, is in collaboration. Oftentimes the neighborhood program, neighborhood association can be helpful for this too. Neighborhoods association can just be all over the place with these great ideas. Okay, so block planning is another tool that there ought to be city staff in every city to be helpful in advocating and being there to help citizens for working through the block planning. What block planning is a land use tool that's for redesigning an entire block, and assuming everybody agrees to that, you can imagine the type of professional level facilitation you would need to get people to agree for what to do with maybe changing setbacks, even traffic perhaps if it was a quiet street, landscaping. City code doesn't go away with a block plan. The city still requires certain things that you have to do, but with a block plan, you enter into a realm of performance compliance, meaning the city will say, this is the result we want, just kind of show us how you're going to do it. In contrast to if it's prescriptive when the city says, this is what you do, and don't ask us anything more, just do that, and maybe we'll approve what you're doing. This is enormous, because that creates a whole amount of flexibility and creativity where an entire block can be, wow, permaculture block. The city of Eugene actually employed a consultant 30 years ago to try to get this going here in Eugene. There were a few neighborhood groups that met, didn't make it very far. It just really never kind of got off the ground. But the city still recognizes this. And I talk with other people in other towns, this might have a different name, but check it out, you know, as a way to be ambitious. You know, the property doesn't become a commune, everybody still owns their property, but it is a lot more flexibility. And when you look at this idealized diagram here, wow, if you were a permaculture designer, you'd have a really good time, and this would create a lot of jobs doing this. So the green, kind of a more green economy and culture, there is economic activity and opportunity. It may not be quite as jet fueled as what we're used to, but people would have jobs. And what better kind of job than something about block planning, not just a single property, but multiple properties. We visited East Blair Housing Co-op yesterday, and there at East Blair, they have a lot of aspects of block planning there too. So a good question could be asked: how do we pay for all this? I mean, this doesn't happen for free. You know, people have got to make some money doing the work. How do you pay for this? If you want to look at it in this way, there's really no shortage in money. At least in the macro sense, you know, within the entire community or within the entire country, there's plenty of money. It's just, what do we spend it on? And when you consider that a lot of things people buy, you pay twice for it. You pay for the actual product or the service. And when you consider what a lot of people buy, probably not so much people here, but what a lot of people buy, you pay twice. You pay for it first, and if it's something like tobacco or too much alcohol or junk food or even cars, you pay for it again, because those types of products cause accidents, they cause visits to the hospital, they can actually be really expensive. You know, we all know the term external costs, because when you buy something, the price doesn't really reflect what the entire cost is of that item. You know, it's environmental, it's social, we all know that. So when we start making more conscious choices, and which many people here are already doing, myself included, there's an enormous amount of money. I wouldn't be surprised that if nationwide, if people had spending habits that was mainstream normal, like the average we have right here, that would amount to hundreds of billions of dollars. Hundreds of billions of dollars that could be invested in block planning and doing these different kinds of projects that we like to see too. So I'm seeing that there's not really very much of a shortage of money. It's just kind of what we do with it. So a friend of mine is very fond of sort of observing that while we still have access to affordable resources, that we should make the best use of those resources. How much time do we have to make the best use of those resources to rebuild, to repair what's already here? I think a lot of people are tuned into that. It's important to reach out and maybe not be too aggressive and trying to persuade our friends and neighbors of this, but to be an example is the best thing we can do. I don't know if I'm ever going to win my brother over totally, but there's lots of good examples of people sharing this information, going on bike tours, coming to Convergence. When you go back home and say, wow, went to this Convergence over the weekend, you've got a lot of awesome, wonderful information, and you can be a buzz, you know, you can be a courier of these good ideas.